No matter where you grew up, we all grew up in the same place, this America. The land of the free and the home of the brave. The land they handed down from generation to generation, and now people are trying to tell us that our forefathers were a disgrace. You know, the ones who gave their lives tilling frontiers into cities, plains into skyscrapers, and turning deserts into gardens. We build on the shoulders of our forefathers. We don't trample on their graves, because the old paths they cleared paved the way for us to greater heights. Small government, bold business, faithful families, as we build innovative companies, launch educational movements, build healthy churches, pubs, and businesses, and work with the same determinations our forefathers had to make our country more of what we know as this America. Join me as I go on a mission to find those 21st century pioneers who still believe in this America.
Oh, yeah. That's what you say.
Don't put that in the show. I won't say that in the show. But.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to Cross Politics on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Pastor Toby Chuck Knox. I'm the water boy, and it's really...
This is the wrong music.
Really good. It's okay.
I'm so excited.
It's okay.
That's what I want hitting right now.
We got Dr. Ryan Cole and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya in the studio, and if you guys... I'm just going to say this right now. You guys are like my COVID heroes.
Come on, bro.
For real.
Come on, bro.
We found you guys, I remember in March 2020, we started doing a show every day. And theologically, from jump, we were like, no, this ain't right.
Something's wrong.
Something's wrong here.
Something's off.
And we know what the Bible teaches about the role of government and pandemics and what the role of the church is and what the role of family is. And that's kind of where our initial response was and our initial approach in the conversation of being like, this ain't right. And then we started on our own researching. We read all the mass study. I never thought I'd read a mass. I didn't even know what a randomized control study was. And we started researching all these mass studies, pre-pandemic, because they all said that
medical journals, randomized control testing,
all that stuff. Masking does not work for the general population. And so that was kind of, we started reading all these medical studies, and then we started wanting,
That's we had to talk to somebody. We want
to talk to somebody. We wanted to talk to people that had their head on straight and weren't being cowed and by the medical industrial complex and of course the CDC and all that stuff. And so I can't remember how we exactly stumbled upon you, Dr. J.
I remember.
You remember?
Yes, I was up late at night searching the internet for it when you still could search YouTube and find information. And I was just like, somebody who opposes COVID, help.
Help.
Yeah, and I remember I was on Twitter and I saw somebody talk about, you have to listen to this. This is really good. And it was an interview of you at Stanford. And I went to YouTube and I was like, oh, wow, I'm not the only one. Oh, this is such a breath of fresh air. It was like 25 or 23-minute interview. And it was just saying, hey, I don't think that we need to be locking down everything. And this is going to have economic effects.
That interview changed my life.
One?
Yeah, because that one, I think, got like 2 million views. It was crazy. I'd never published... all I did was like write papers for a living, peer reviewed. I never went on TV, maybe once or twice before.
But it's like Stanford TV or whatever.
Yeah,
it was like college students filming you.
No, actually, it was Peter Robinson, who's like this very famous. He was like a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. I've known him forever because he works at Hoover and just we're friends. And she said, Jay, we were just having coffee. He's like, Jay, no one's saying what you're saying. We should just film you saying it.
Yeah.
And so that's what that short interview was like. And I was mainly it was just like, I said what I didn't know. I didn't know what the infection fatality rate was. I didn't know. I mean, there was a lot that people were saying was true that I knew that they couldn't know was true.
Right.
Not that it was false. It's just they couldn't have the evidence to say that it was true.
Like what? Like what was it?
The main thing is like at that time, this is like March 2020, I'd seen what had happened with the H1N1 swine flu. What had happened there was like there were all these originally people were like, okay, it's a 5% death rate. That's what World Health Organization says. And there are all these studies that come out where there's they do studies of antibodies in the population. Now, you could fight over whether the antibodies actually protect you. I think they do, but whatever. But for sure, what it means is you've been infected and recovered.
Right. Right.
So
you've had it.
Yes, you've had it. And so they do these studies in 2009, and they find 100, 200 times more infections than cases. And I thought, okay, this is a really highly infectious disease. No one's done this study to say how widespread it is. And they're going around saying it's a 3% death rate. Yeah. Well, they don't know that. Right. No one's done the study. Why are they saying this, panicking the population before they've done the study?
Man. All right. I've got to read this ad. We're just going to go.
I just had a bunch of questions.
We just went in. We just went in right there. But let me read the ad so I don't get in trouble with Garrison later. Jesus is Lord in public and in private, and in every area of life must be subject to his lordship. And our use of technology is no exception. What captures our attention on a screen either glorifies or dishonors our Lord. That's why accountable to you, that's the word accountable, the number 2, the word you, accountable to you is committed to promoting biblical accountability in our families and churches. Their monitoring and reporting software makes transparency easy on all your devices so you can say with the psalmist, I will not set anything worthless before my eyes. Mm-hmm. So guard against temptation with accountable to you and live for God's glory. And you can learn more. Try it for free at accountable2you.com/FLF. That's accountable2you.com/FLF. And in other news, Accountable to You is actually hiring. They'd like you to know if you'd like more information and will be interested in relocating to beautiful Kentucky, which is not too far from the Ark Encounter, where we'll be hanging out.
And they're going to be at the conference.
And help fight against a lust-filled culture. Visit accountable2you.com/careers for more information. That's accountable2you.com/careers. All right. Now, before we get back into the conversation, we got to do proper introductions.
Yes,
proper introductions. Because not every day we have famous doctors on the show.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Professor of Health Policy at Stanford University, Research Associate at National Bureau of Economics Research. His recent research is focused on epidemiology. Before this pandemic, I couldn't even say that word.
No.
I mean, that's one of the things that this pandemic has done for us. We can all say epidemiology now.
Yeah, that's true.
I was telling my wife that, Dr. Jay's in town. She's like, remind me who Dr. Jay is. He's an epidemiologist. And I said it to her like 15 times. And I feel like I'm kind of proud of myself, actually. I didn't get stuck in it at all. Anyways, he as he was just saying just a minute ago, really everything blew up during COVID, asking questions, asking whether or not these public policies were actually scientific,
based on studies,
reasons, this kind of stuff. Yeah. He holds an MD and a PhD in economics, both earned at Stanford University. To my right, Dr. Ryan Cole is pathology specialist in Boise, Idaho. He graduated with honors from Medical College of Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine in 1997. Has 23 years of diverse experiences, especially in pathology. And it says here you affiliate with no hospital. Yeah. Cooperates with many other doctors and specialists without joining any medical groups. He's board certified, Mayo Clinic, trained anatomic and clinical pathologist, seen over 350,000 patients in lab. Whoa. And under microscope, 350,000.
It's up to 500,000.
I was going to say that number might be a little bit small now.
Yeah. I've diagnosed 500,000 in my career. Yeah.
You can find out more about him at Cole.
He doesn't know what he's doing.
Cole Diagnostics.
It's only a million, right?
ColeDiagnostics.com is where you can find out more about Dr. Cole. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on Cross Politic.
Great to be here. Thanks.
In the flesh. We've had both of you on the show a number of times. Yeah. And
I remember how I found Dr. Cole too. I think we were looking for just somebody who was speaking up. That's all we wanted.
We wanted someone who had a lab.
Yeah, we were reading a lot of papers, but then it was like, okay, you start hearing there's this process called exercise. It's good for your health. And so if you do it, you actually will get better.
And if you take vitamin D.
Vitamin D, right? Vitamin C, vitamin A, and zinc. And then you actually have an immune system that works. Nobody was talking like this at all. Yeah. And out of nowhere, I don't remember what trace I found to get to you, but
it was a talk I gave at the state legislature at the invitation of the lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
And it was a little lunchtime lecture. I thought I was talking to 100 people.
So was this in March or April?
March of 21.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
March of 21?
Yeah.
Oh, we actually found you before that.
Oh, I was talking out in the community down in Boise before that, but that's the one that went to tens of millions of people.
Okay.
And that's the common sense one where everyone's like, wait, that just makes sense.
I do remember that, and we showed clips of that on the show when that came out. But of course, I think you're right. I think we actually had found you before that.
Yep.
Probably because the newspaper, here's a lab.
It was something because I remember emailing you and you
Yeah.
didn't respond for my first 3 emails. I'm like, I'm not letting up on this.
Yeah.
And if
He's in Idaho.
By confession, at the moment, I'm 110,000 emails behind.
I know how it goes. I'm not offended at all.
Gabe has about as many probably in his inbox.
Yeah.
But
just hearing somebody say, you know what? Don't fear. That was one of the first things I remember you saying.
Amen.
Don't fear. Do your walk 20 minutes one way, come back the other 20 minutes, do it in the morning. Take your vitamin D, particularly people of color, because their skin tone doesn't allow the vitamin D to get in the same way.
Right, yeah.
And so take your vitamin D, and you can even take a little more than probably what you typically would do, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I remember you saying it like that. It was weird. I knew these things, I understand them, but hearing them from a doctor, right? And it just made me say, because nowhere on television was there any way you'll be fine. No. Run from everybody.
Right.
And it was ventilators at that point. Remember at the very beginning, they were pushing ventilators.
Yeah.
Trump helped orchestrate how many ventilators in New York and all that. I mean, they were blowing up people's lungs with ventilators. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Cole comes along and says, vitamin D and
maybe the body that God gave you can actually fight off some of this.
Yeah.
So here's part of what I was thinking about today was I kind of do want to do a COVID check-in or check-up. It's been 3 years now that we've gone through this.
No ventilators, please.
Right. But as you guys look at things now, how bad did we break us?
I think Jay's the one to answer that one. I mean, from the Great Barrington Declaration until now, I mean, Jay's got the big picture on that.
I mean, thank you, Ryan. But I think this was the worst public health mistake in history. I think
Wow.
I think we can say that because what happened was that we subverted every single piece of wisdom we had in public health about how to manage a crisis. First thing you think about is how are the poor and vulnerable people going to be affected by the thing that you do. And we decided, you remember earlier in the pandemic, there was this, you can't think about the economy, you got to think about lives. Lives versus economy. Economy is much less important than lives. I agree with that. Lives are more important than the economy, right?
Yeah.
But it was never lives versus economy. The economic harm done by our lockdowns, it circled the globe. All of the world's economies are interrelated, interconnected. All the poor economies of the world depend on the United States and other rich economies functioning well. And 100 million people were thrown into poverty around the world. $2 a day or less of income. 130 million people. This was the estimate by the UN early on. We're going to be we're going to be put to the brink of starvation.
Yeah.
It was always lives versus lives, and we chose to say, let's try to protect our lives at the expense of the lives of the poor.
Wow.
I mean, and so public health. I mean, that's one of the ethical principles of public health. You should be thinking about everybody, especially the poor, especially the marginalized populations, and we just threw that away. You're never supposed to fearmonger. You're supposed to the response you have has to be evidence based, has to be proportionate, not Swiss cheese, right? Where you just say whatever you like.
Right.
The central thing was we made people think of their neighbor as a biohazard.
Huh. Yeah, that's right.
So you're not these aren't people to love. You threw away the wisdom that you need to be in community. That's part of our health.
Right.
Instead, we said everyone around you is a danger to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
You were telling me earlier about Uganda. Can you say that again? So this is just one country, right?
This is one. So we closed schools. We knew that from the very earliest days of the pandemic, we knew that children were at very low risk of dying from COVID. We knew that for a fact from looking at the data from China, Italy, elsewhere. At the same time, we also got data out of Iceland that kids were not super spreaders. I mean, you could get the disease and spread it, but it's not like the flu. There's something about kids that sort of gives them this protection.
Yeah.
And on the basis of that, Sweden kept its schools open. Huh. Nevertheless, the World Health Organization and Western epidemiologists said, close schools. And poor countries everywhere close schools. Not Zoom school. Like you rural Uganda, you don't have Zoom
There's
school.
There's no Zoom in Uganda, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's some Zoom, but you have to go to cities, right? You don't get it in, I mean,
Right.
or India, they closed schools for 2 years. Philippines, they closed schools for 2 years. Kids did not see the inside of a classroom at all. In many cases, nothing.
Wow.
In Uganda, the report was that 4.5 million kids never came back after 2 years out of school. Wow. And a lot of that, it turns out, again, according to UN reports, it was the parents were so impoverished that they were forced to choose between selling their kids into sexual slavery and child labor, or having their family starve. That's what we did to the poorest people around the world.
Wow.
Yeah. I like to say, everybody knows common sense is not common, but now common science is no longer common.
Wow.
I mean, that's the other thing, Ryan. We did this in the name of science. We did this in the name of medicine.
Ryan, what did you see? I mean, so you're from a kind of different perspective, maybe not quite as global, but what did we break and how bad did we break it from your perspective? And maybe specifically just in terms of like science, in terms of the practice of medicine.
Well, we threw away history. We knew about coronaviruses long prior to this, SARS-CoV-1, MERS. We knew the affected populations in those pandemics, and we threw away what we understood about virology and the immune system. And to Jay's point on the epidemiology, knowing that a lot of people had already had this before it ever really became, big on the scene. And Dr. Iannidi's study showed that the number of people that had already had COVID. And we threw away natural immunity. We threw away the fact that once you're recovered from a disease, your body has a degree of protection against, getting it again and or being as sick again. Obviously, we know variants came along or scariants or whatever you want to call them at this point. But scariants. We're going to scare you with the next one.
Yeah.
And now we're to the point where we have coldvid, not COVID. Omicron's a common cold for most people. Now, unfortunately, we took measures that affected the immune system and these investigational biological genetic products that were injected into a lot of people weren't without their risks and their bad outcomes. And we need to recognize that any new medical intervention is going to have potential harms. And so there are a lot of people now that are suffering. This is the Zogby poll that showed out of 100 Americans, 15 out of 100 have a new medical condition after the rollout of the shots. Good news is 85 out of 100 don't. Bad news is 15% of billions of people is a lot of people. And so not recognizing the fact that people have been harmed, I think, is another drawback that we find ourselves in societally now. That's one thing we do in the laboratory in conjunction with my colleagues in Germany, Dr. Burkhardt and others. We've been documenting the harms of the injections and COVID itself as well. But it's unfortunate to Jay's point, where we're putting the poor and those who are in unfortunate situations into worse situations. At the same time, we're also sidelining people who have real life harm and real life human stories, loss of loved ones, etc., and not paying enough financial attention to their plight and putting the federal funding into researching after doing something so experimental, not researching ways in which we can help them. The independent medical community has stepped up and is doing so, but it's really unfortunate that the federal funding isn't being put in that same direction to the degree that it should.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised about that. I'm not surprised at all. You mean the private sector is actually stepping up and doing its thing? Yeah, I'm not surprised. I am. So I want to ask, is there any way to fix some of the problems that we've seen with, particularly economically, when you speak of Uganda and, January 2020, no parent is thinking, I'm going to have to sell my child off into sex slavery because of a pandemic that's coming up that's going to stop. And that's going to be our only two options. No parents think of that in January. But now it's 3 years later. COVID's over. Is there any way to remedy or fix that problem?
I mean, there's some things you can fix and some things you can't fix, right? So, I think, for instance, in the United States, there are a tremendous number of children who are years behind. And we have to work to fix that. Like
but the key is you just lower the standard. Like the CDC
I think that's a good idea.
Oh, so you didn't meet your milestone at this age. We'll just shift the milestone 6 months.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, that's
that's not fixing it.
And then there's like medical problems that were we delayed cancer screening for years. We said don't go get your cancer. I mean, so that means women are showing up with breast cancer that should have been identified as early stage. So you can fix some of that stuff. Some of the stuff is just broken. I think the fundamental thing to me is what lessons have we learned?
Yeah.
If there's another pandemic, will we do the same thing again? And I tell you, I am not optimistic at this point. The people that essentially designed the policies that we followed, they're giving themselves awards. They're giving commencement speeches, and they're like patting themselves on the back as if they were success.
You do know what an elephant is. It's a mouse built to government standards, and that's and that's the problem we have. Is we have all these agencies that are so bureaucratically entrenched that the foresight. And I agree with you. I think what we need to do is not repeat this. But everybody, to your point, is patting each other on the back saying, great job, team.
The Biden administration put out a plan for the next pandemic. They announced it. They said, okay, the next pandemic, what we're going to do is we're going to even more rapidly develop vaccines. Within 130 days of the identification of the virus or the pathogen, we'll have a vaccine. And so my question, I have lots of questions about this, but like I said, like first is like, how do you test a vaccine in 130 days? Even if you have you have the product available immediately and you start to like manufacture it, you have to actually still run a randomized trial. Like once upon a time in medicine, that's what we used to do. How long would that randomized trial last? I mean, for this vaccine,
2 days.
Yeah, I think so. Like we had 9 months to develop the vaccine, essentially, which is that blew my mind. That's something I got wrong at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought it would take years. But you only followed patients for 2 months in a 9-month trial.
And then you threw the placebo group away.
Yeah, afterwards.
I mean, not you,
it worked.
The government threw the placebo group
But the point is that let's say magically we have some vaccine available. They magically test it within 130 days. Well, what do we do during those 130 days? Well, we're going to lock down again is what we're going to do. We're going to scare the living daylights of the population again. 4 months, 4.5 months is the plan of in effect, now they didn't say in the plan lockdown, but that is exactly what they will do.
You shut up.
But and this brings up a great point. This brings up a great point, Jay, because what should we have done and focus on repurposed medications that could be efficacious against the virus?
No, we were those are horse paste. I don't know.
I love Joe Rogan's response. Like, I can afford human medicine.
Right.
But that, I mean, that's a great point, though, is there's entrenched pharmaceutical regulatory conflicts of interest that say, well, a vaccine is the only answer in a pandemic.
I mean, I think it should be an all of the above approach like that. So to your point about Ryan, which I completely agree with, the question is, in 2020, why did we not have as much effort put into doing randomized studies for cheap repurposed drugs? Because that would help not just the United States. Like if you have cheap drug that you find works, helps the poorest of the poor everywhere, because it's rather than some expensive drug that only rich countries can get.
That's right.
Right. So you do an all of the above approach. We have Tony Fauci sits on $10 billion of money. Why didn't he put that to testing a huge number of potentially useful repurposed drugs?
Because that would be moral and ethical.
That's a rhetorical question, right?
Well, it's the other thing, epidemiologically, like from a public health point of view, identify who's vulnerable.
Correct.
Right? And then morally work night and day to protect them. That's the most important thing. The people who are least vulnerable, in this case, it was young people. Don't scare the living daylights out of them. That disrupts their lives, harms them. 1 in 4 young adults in July 2020, according to the CDC study, seriously considered suicide the previous month. 1 in 4.
Wow.
In the United States.
So you mentioned earlier me and Dr. Dave been driving around North Idaho together and been debating and fighting one another in the car.
We have.
So that's a normal conversation with
Gabe. That's all Gabe does in the car.
It's been a lot of fun. But you mentioned earlier that you don't think the shutdown by the leadership, Fauci, so forth, was malicious. And I would say
he's a nice guy.
I know.
I know. This is a good soul.
I would say I don't think the shutdown by Governor Little was malicious. I think he's just uninformed and going with the pressures that were on him. But to me, the shutdown from Fauci, Birx, kind of that sector of the shutdown, I think it was intentional and malicious because you had Fauci saying, "Oh yeah, just in March." Beginning of March 2020 saying like, oh, masks don't work for the general population. And then 3 months later, he's like, oh, we all need to wear masks. And then later on, he says, yeah, it might do you good to double up masks. Remember, he even said that.
Yeah.
And then at one point, he's talking about maybe even wearing goggles.
I remember the goggles.
We did a show. We opened up a show where we were all wearing goggles on the show. Come
on, Dr. J. You can't be that nice.
Okay. Let me try to defend myself. Okay, and I'll bring up one piece of evidence that's really important to know, right? So in February of 2020, the World Health Organization organized a mission to China. And you can read the FOIA documents, Freedom of Information Act requests documents, and it's really interesting. Like the U.S. NIH was dead focused on making sure that Tony Fauci's deputy, Cliff Lane, got to go on this trip. There are all these like emails between the Chinese embassy or South State Department, whatever their State Department is, to make sure that in the World Health Organization, to make sure an American's on the trip. So Cliff Lane goes on this trip, Tony Fauci's deputy, comes back and writes an email to this epidemiologist at the World Health Organization saying, look, what China did worked. Now, what China had done in January 2020 was lock down. Lock people in apartments, wouldn't let them out even if the building was on fire, that kind of lockdown.
Which happened.
Yeah.
And yes,
I don't want to live in that world.
It worked.
We burned up all the COVID people.
And this email is chilling. It says, albeit at great cost.
Yeah. Right.
And
wow.
what the rest of the world has a very difficult set of decisions to make. It should involve more than just the people in this room. That's the content of the email. The World Health Organization's mission concluded that the Chinese authoritarian power was the way to improve public health in the world. And then at the same time, in Italy, you have all these bodies lined up, cathedrals. People are panicking. The Italian healthcare system's overrun, which baseline is overrun, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
And so you have this like contrast that transformed the minds of so many people in public health. Like in February 2020. Tony Fauci is a reasonable man. He sounds like he'd written the Great Barrington Declaration in February 2020.
Wow.
You read these op-eds in Washington Post by people who later become fierce lockdowners, and there's just it could very well just be the Great Barrington Declaration saying let's identify vulnerable people, don't fearmonger, don't disrupt society, make sure kids go to school. All of that was part of the standard plan as of February 20. What transformed it was people truly were convinced that the Chinese way was the right way.
Well, that's their first mistake.
We looked at the communists and thought, good idea.
Like, when did we start saying, you know what, totalitarian government? That's the way. That's the way. If we're Americans, don't we say, wait, Americans have a different mentality about how we feel about our neighbors?
I love what Bobby Kennedy says. He says, look, there is no constitutional exception for a pandemic.
Right.
And we unfortunately...
I said that too.
Yeah.
Maybe you got it.
You stole your line, Gabe.
I remember that episode, Gabe. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I remember that. But we as a people, and having served in the military and sworn an oath to defend that Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, what frustrates me is the American people allowed their rights and freedoms to be turned into privileges. And this goes to the lockdown question, and it goes down to so many questions. And I think this is what we need to remember going forward, is the fact that there is no constitutional exception for a pandemic, and our rights are our rights, and they are not privileges; they're God-given rights, and we need to remember that going forward, no matter what happens. Even if we have a pandemic that is, horrific, at the same time, then let's do the things that Jay and I were talking about. Let's focus on those early treatments. Let's focus on protecting those. We learned a lesson from this. Hopefully, I know many of us have. It's common knowledge now. It used to be kind of private knowledge, and can I talk to this person about this or that? But now we have this common knowledge of, hey, fool me once, shame on me, but fool me twice.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna fool me again.
Shame on you, Shep. you know what I meant.
Yeah, no.
I did a little Bushism there.
I got your back.
Hello, America.
I got your back. So
Strategery.
I've been watching kind of the way that things are going in the last 3 years, and I keep thinking everybody's forgotten where we were. I think people forgotten the message, and you guys you guys are on tour, going around talking to everybody. I want to talk about that in a second, but I'm at the point now, and guys, smack me if I'm wrong on this. I'm like, you know what? Doggone it. Nobody's learned their lesson. Bring on COVID 2.0.
Yep.
I just
Teach us, Lord.
We have not learned.
No, please no. I want to go back to just writing papers for a living.
No, Doc, we need you, man. I think, but I don't think that we've learned that. I watch people just still. Just be so like we were talking about this earlier. You said that there are a lot of people that you're talking to that are getting it, okay? But we still have the same people giving themselves awards in offices.
Yeah.
We haven't cleaned out all the cancer yet.
No.
So we haven't learned our lesson.
It goes back to Benjamin Franklin, paraphrasing: "Those that would give up a little liberty for safety deserve neither."
Right.
And we have this degree of safetyism and comfortism in the Western world. Oh, I'm safe. I'm comfortable. Yeah, they can do whatever they want. But if we value freedom over safety and comfort, then this doesn't happen again.
I mean, I think there's Ryan knows this because he's in medicine, and when a patient dies in medicine, you have a little conference called an M&M conference, morbidity and mortality conference.
Yeah.
And the idea is that it's not to like blame people; it's to have an honest, frank discussion by the caregivers about what went wrong. And sometimes people blame people inside the meeting, but the key thing is not the blame. The key thing is reform. Right, so you don't do the same thing again. Or with plane crashes, you have that NTSB investigation with the black box and all that.
Yeah,
and you say, okay, well, what went wrong? We need something like that for this pandemic.
But you were in the White House at points. Did you go to the White House too? I don't remember.
I did not.
Okay, but
just the Senate.
Well, there's no good
all,
White
yeah.
House and Senate. Those are good places to be. But why is it that your voice wasn't heard there in the middle of all this? And we had Donald Trump as the president at this time.
Yeah, so that was a really fraught time. This was August of 2020. My friend Scott Atlas was picked by President Trump to be his advisor.
Right.
And Scott's calling me up every day in that summer. We're like talking about papers because it's a pretty exciting time to be a scientist. All this new stuff is coming out about the disease, and people are publishing it over. And how many times in your life do you get to learn about a new disease as a scientist?
Right.
And I'm sharing this information with Scott. He's sharing information with me. But every day he calls me, says, I'm showing these data to Fauci and Birx, and they won't listen. They're not interested in hearing data. They'd already made up their minds about this disease.
That's why it's malicious.
I think that's hubris. I think the fundamental thing is hubris.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I think, and President Trump, it's the re-election campaign's happening. He chooses Scott Atlas to be his advisor, right? It's like I'm going to change generals in the middle of a war. You don't leave the old generals around,
right,
to undermine him, and they undermined Scott.
Yeah,
and it was. I think for President Trump, his advisors were telling him that if he fires Fauci and Birx, he's losing the election. I don't understand that. If you're the president of the United States, you have to do the right thing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think fear is still a big part of this. I mean, we've talked about this already, but I mean, you talk about Italy with body bags everywhere and the contrast of at least apparently looking like China did better or whatever. But it seems to me that people are really blinded by fear. And I think fear of death, honestly. I think just that the people who built this country and the people who have done so much good, not knowing the state of their souls at all, but I think there's been a culture in our land that was willing to die for what was right.
Yeah.
Willing to die for what was right and what was true. There's been a culture of that. And that's been built on, frankly, a Christian worldview that said there are some things that are more important than life. Truth is more important. Freedom is more important than life.
It's like one of the things I've admired about Dr. Cole and about Ryan is that he's willing to give up everything to say what he sees as true. I mean, I think that's in order to say what we did is wrong during the pandemic, you had to do that. it's so odd that we are in such a place in society that requires that kind of courage. My job is just to write what I think is true based on my data analysis. That's it. That's all my job is, right?
Right.
I don't know why that should require courage. That's just my job. But yet it really did. Like, people had to decide my reputation is less important than my saying what I see is true.
Yeah,
100%. And in pathology, we're observers. I don't create a car crash. I don't prevent a car crash. I observe and report the scene of the crash. And pathology, we're the quality control of medicine. I like to joke we're the most important doctor that you never meet that you always hope is right, because we either have your blood or a piece of you in the lab and you're waiting for an answer. I
would never have to see you, Ryan.
Something's going wrong.
But to Jay's point, and he's absolutely correct, our job is to observe and report and tell the truth. And to your point, Toby, is what is fear? False expectations as real. That's what fear is. And we were pushed into all these false expectations societally by the narratives that came forth. And I love the point you bring up. That which does not kill us delays the inevitable. And so having this zest for life and living life, no matter the risks, instead of living that life of fear, live a life of joy and purpose and meaning. Because if you're lucky enough to get 20 years, awesome. If you're lucky enough to get 85 years, awesome. And what we've seen, I like to say, the moment you stop learning or the moment you lose your curiosity is the moment you die. And so societally, what's happening is we're seeing people die at 25 but not be buried till they're 85. And so we've lost this curiosity and this critical thinking within our society. And it's so important to say, look, I've been blessed with a new day of life. The biggest swear word in my home raising my 6 daughters was, I'm bored.
6 daughters.
Yes, 6 daughters, yes.
I'm
daughters,
bored.
yes.
6 daughters and they're bored?
But that was the swear word, because I'm like, this amazing gift of life that you have, and you have this one opportunity at life to make it amazing. I like to joke, knowledge is my drug of choice. And the opportunity to have a new day of life is to learn something new or to do something good in the world. And we've lost that.
Yeah, that's really good.
That's beautiful.
Talk to us about what you faced. So, I mean, you've been through the ringer here, and I haven't kept up with it all. I've seen little things here and there.
I haven't kept up with it.
We got kicked off YouTube. I don't know if that matters at all.
Yeah, no, well, and Jay, has gone through a lot of that as well, just in terms of the censorship. I like to joke, look, if you want to know the real science, follow the silenced. And that's where we are societally. But I spoke out early on, yes. I'm a common sense doctor, a lot of years of experience, background in immunology and virology PhD work, which I dropped out of my PhD when my first daughter was on the way. I figured I didn't need to be a doctor like Jay. but so really. Just being a doctor was okay. But anyway, I think, when I spoke out, I could immediately see the pushback from the media. Local newspapers down in Boise attack me, and then all the wires pick it up and put it around the world. So the first thing that society does is try to, like Jay said, destroy your reputation. And I'm confident in the science. I'm still waiting for the apology from the media. I'm not expecting it to come.
It's right behind Tucker's, I'm sure.
And then my professional society didn't like what I was saying, so they removed my fellowship without notification, without a hearing.
Wow.
Yeah, the College of American Pathologists. And Jay and I were talking about this. I'll be looking at certain lawsuits against large organizations. I don't know how fruitful those will be, but at the same time, there was a narrative behind all of this. We've been attacked relentlessly, been consistent on the science, and I always say, look, I have no ego about any of this. This is about humanity. If I'm wrong, teach me so that I can do better on behalf of a patient.
Right.
And that's what's so important in all this. Yeah, I'm sure, I'm under attack. Thankfully, 4 out of 5 states where my licenses were under attack have dropped it. The People's Republic of Washington is still, that's yet to come. That's another thing. I had to sell my lab. Not because a board of medicine did anything to me, but the insurers. They said, we don't like what you're saying. We're canceling your contract for unprofessional behavior.
Oh my goodness.
I lost 30% of my business overnight. And then my clients are like, well, 500,000 patients, you do great work. And I ended up having to sell my lab to my associate because I couldn't get paid for what I do anymore. And so they took 10 years off of my career. Again, these weren't boards of medicine. These are private companies putting the squeeze on people. I would venture to say there are probably 5 pathologists in the country that have seen as many biopsies as I've seen in my career.
But and remember, these are the same insurance companies that are covering transgendered surgeries.
Correct. And those doctors aren't having their licenses attacked for mutilating children.
Right. Oh my goodness. Wow. That's nuts. That is insane.
Wow.
But you know what? Would I do it all over again? Darn right I would.
You know what,
Darn
Dr.
right.
J
Amen.
and Dr. Cole, thank you guys.
That's why I kept emailing you and calling you and texting you, because I was like, I got to stay close to Dr. Cole. I'm going to make him a friend.
I want to ask you guys, because we only have a little time left, but I want to ask you guys right now that I don't think that we've cleaned house well. I just said that. I want to know if you guys were selected to be hands for a politician or a governor, what would you do to go about cleaning house so that if we actually have a real pandemic, we won't kill people and we won't destroy the world? What would you do to put things in place that clean the house?
So I think I would. I'm just going to focus on the federal level, because the state level, there's a lot I think that can be done. But and like we've seen places like Florida do it, and but at the federal level, I think fundamentally our public health bureaucracy functioned incredibly poorly. I think you guys agree with that. I think.
I think it always has. But.
Well, I mean, particularly during the pandemic, right? So like just take the NIH. You essentially had the NIH running the pandemic. But why, right? So we have a CDC. The CDC is our public health authority, not the NIH. Why did Tony Fauci at the NIH effectively run the pandemic? That had a lot of consequences. So like he controls a whole bunch of federal money. He and Francis Collins control an enormous amount of money that determines the careers of scientists. If you cross them, your career as a scientist is potentially threatened. So what was there a consensus? Well, there's a lot of silent scientists who self-silence because they're like, I don't want to be on the other side of this of these people that potentially control my well-being or my career. The other thing about the NIH is they have an intramural program where scientists at the NIH can patent drugs or get patents, right? At the same time, they also recommend what treatments to give.
Right.
That's a conflict of interest there. So you have like, there are these like things where like, you notice them once they come into the forefront, but there's also like ways to fix it, right? So for instance, there's great scientists all across the country. Why does most of the NIH money go to like 3 states? What I would do, like, let's have 7 regional NIHs. And they'll be in competition with each other. Science works best when there's competition. So if there's going to be one Tony Fauci, let there be 7 fighting with each other to like, there won't be one person that will come up and say, I am the science. Right. You'll have, if you're going to have an NIH, have it dispersed. What the FDA is captured by pharma interest. And in fact, pharma pays for the FDA's operations for like, 30-40% of the operations are pharma funding.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 45% here. In the UK, it's 80%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That funds their equivalent of the FDA.
And if you're going to have an FDA, it has to be independent of the group that it's regulating at the very least, right?
Right.
So I think there are things that like the next president could do that would be quite popular and would make an immediate difference. We do, and like the CDC needs a thorough rethink, but maybe we can talk about that later.
I'd love to hear about that. What a rethink looks like there. What about for governors? Anything for governors too?
Yeah, I think what we saw a lot of is, we saw one governor stand up, and that's really, and Kristi Noem did as well to a degree, but surrounding yourself with dissenting voices is critically important. And unfortunately, I don't expect any of them to be scientists, but surrounding yourself, like even in Idaho, what happened is Governor Little formed, a COVID council, and a lot of colleagues are like, well, why is Dr. Cole not on it?
Yeah,
well,
I was going to ask you.
Because I wasn't saying the things that were popular. I'm like, that's what you need. You need dissenting voices to say, can we check ourselves on this?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that's right. And we need to think globally, but we have to act locally. And I like Jay's idea, decentralize things, because when there is dialogue, then the consensus is going to be different. And science isn't done by consensus. Most of the great science that's happened historically has been that dissenting voice and that eureka moment. Galileo, they threw him in the tower. He was still right. And so we need to honor the voices and listen to all voices in order to come to conclusions that may be different than what we're comfortable with. But I think acting at the local level first and then regionally and then nationally.
Actually, there's something nationally you can do about that. Because it turns out that a lot of the censorship that happened, it was actually organized by the federal government.
Correct. Right.
Like there's that. Like I'm involved with this lawsuit brought by the Louisiana and Missouri attorney generals against the federal government, against the Biden administration. It turns out a dozen federal agencies were effectively threatening social media companies to deplatform ideas they didn't like, even true things like immunity after COVID recovery. You write something about that, you get tossed off YouTube. Masking toddlers is a bad idea. Apparently, that you can get tossed off YouTube for that.
Yeah, that's why we were gone.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think so. The federal government needs to actually honor the First Amendment.
Amen.
Wow.
100%.
Yeah. Right. Which is what it was.
It's there. Like, it's right there. It's like
It's so simple.
I guess if you don't have the kind of people that are willing to, you talked about taking an oath. When you take an oath, that you're saying, I'm going to honor this, even though others might not.
And you don't take an oath to a degree that it's comfortable.
Right.
You take an oath.
That's right.
No.
But I don't think we don't have the people. That's why I'm thinking like the next generation. Dr. J, you were saying that as you're on tour, you're saying the masses are waking up, but it's the people who are in power who are the problem.
Yeah.
But I keep thinking but if you have the masses who aren't kicking out the people who are in authority, then the masses are still the problem.
I think that's. I have to. I'm very sad about what I'm have to say because I always thought it didn't really matter that much who the leaders were. I mean, it really mattered the hearts and minds of the people. But I think that unless there's some political price to be paid for the decisions about the lockdowns, the school closure, and so on, the politicians will do it again. Mm-hmm. The public health leaders will do it again. There has to be some political price paid for that. That's right. For those bad decisions. I think
we like to say we're a nation of laws, which technically is true, but the political will to enforce the laws has to be there from the people. Right. You're absolutely right.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to even Gabe's arrest in 2020, where the law itself. It was a stupid city
emergency
order that was even passed to begin with, but the law itself actually said that even in these emergency orders, First Amendment rights are protected. Like that's what the law actually said.
Just not when you sing hymns. That's
it's emergency order, not a law.
But
it's emergency order.
Yeah, it was
not
an emergency
a law.
order. But our city code says even in emergency orders, First Amendment rights are preserved. Like it's explicitly there.
It's baked into that cake.
In my county, Santa Clara County, California, there was an emergency order that prevented in-home Bible studies.
That is nuts. No,
it's completely serious. No. There was I was an expert in a legal case that went to the Supreme Court to get that turned over.
Yeah. We had that's nuts.
In the United States, you had a government telling you can't have an in-home Bible.
But you could go to a strip club. You could go to a strip club and a liquor store. That was just fine.
One of the local pastors here pointed out during I think it was during Little's initial lockdown order that you could deliver pizzas. Pizza delivery was still legal, but apparently the way it was worded. A pastor couldn't go to a congregant's home and serve communion. That was prohibited, but you could, Domino's was fine.
There's in San Diego. Oh, sorry, Gabe.
No. I was just going to say that I
never interrupted the doctor.
I joined a lawsuit with him and a couple other churchgoers that got Governor Little to overturn the religious restrictions.
Changed it.
In San Diego, there's a church because strip clubs were allowed and they wanted to meet. they labeled themselves a strip club and had church.
I think
under the label.
And they just took off their tie and coat.
I think, did we have that pastor on?
Rob McCoy. You remember Rob McCoy?
I absolutely love
He
that.
took his tie off.
There you go. There you go. Right. No,
wow.
it's absolutely nuts. Rowdy Christian merch. This is, if you're a fan of Cross Politic or the Fight Laugh Feast Network, then surely you know we have a merch store, right? Rowdy Christian Merch is your one-stop shop for everything cross-politic merchandise. We've got T-shirts, hoodies, hats. But are we going to send the doctors out with some merch?
I hope so.
Because
Yes.
I would love to see Dr. J or Dr. Cole, like,
Fight Laugh Feast T-shirts.
on CNN with Fight Laugh Feast on there. Is that going to happen? Jay's not shaking his head.
I'll wear it. No, that
You
won't
said
happen.
alive.
I won't get invited to CNN.
No, that's the part. Okay, deal. We've got T-shirts, hoodies, hats, but we've also got specialty items like backpacks, mugs, coffee, even AirPod cases. Visit Rowdy Christian merch at rowdychristian.com and buy that next gift or a little something for yourself. Again, it's rowdychristian.com.
Gentlemen, very, very thankful for you guys.
We really,
and your
really
work.
appreciate your
You
work,
have been
your courage.
encouragement for us over here. I can't say enough about you. Super fans.
Absolutely.
Fanning out right now.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
I know you have to run, but can you stick around just for a little bit?
I can stick around for a few minutes.
All right.
Jay has a very important thing
Yes.
to go do.
All right.
And,
if you're
Thanks,
single,
you guys.
get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until next time, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.
It is the duty of the free man to resist tyranny at every turn. Every man will either watch his freedom stripped away or take action to protect what he loves. Introducing the A3, the newest revolutionary body armor from Armored Republic. The A3 is the new standard for lightweight multi-hit body armor. A3 plates are incredibly light at 4.6 pounds. The patented design captures fragmentation while remaining multi-hit capable. The A3 will stop up to M80 ball, yet comes in at only 0.7 inches thick. The A3 is the thinnest NIJ.06 compliant or certified composite standalone plate that includes the drop test. The A3 is the first of its kind, patent pending, that combines an alloy strike face with polyethylene backing, revolutionizing body armor technology by providing strength and durability while remaining sleek and maneuverable. The A3 is the new standard in lightweight body armor. The fight against tyranny just got stronger.
I hope my son is gay.
And I hope that Jesus forgives him just like he does the rest of us.
Doug Wilson, Moscow minister and columnist with the Idahonian Daily News.
The question that confronts us is, what does it mean in a disobedient culture to be prophetic?
There be a place for same-sex couples,
No marriage.
even though it's the law of the land in the United States.
Just like Roe used to be. We want to turn the world upside down, and you don't turn the world upside down by being nice. I believe that we are in this polytheistic, pluralistic moment, and the desperate need of the hour is for our Christian leadership to say, Jesus is Lord, and there is no other.
Fear no man.